So we're going to go over oxyacetylene, welding and cutting. You can also use it to heat up metal to bend with and stuff like that with a rosebud torch. So it's a very versatile. We don't use it as much, especially since plasma cut. We have a plasma cutter, works really well for cutting the metal, but it can come in handy for doing different types of stuff. So I'm going to show you the basics of just a little bit of welding with it and some cutting with it. Anyway, so first off, safety. Make sure that you something protecting your arms. You'll have your leather gloves, shoes to cover your feet. Anyway, also, this doesn't need a full welding helmet, but you need to have some shade 5, just like with the plasma cutter. Those sorts of things. You can use a welding helmet if you have it setting up a welding helmet that has a setting that goes down low enough. But anyway, so what you have here, and these two tanks, oxygen and acetylene, and there's a hose that connects them. Actually, there's a regulator then, and then there's the hose, and then there's the torch body, and then there's these removable tips. This is a welding tip. Let me show you some of the other tips over there. First thing I'm going to say about this, even though this looks like has a hex kind of flats on there, like a nut that you can stick a wrench to, do not use a wrench on the tips. They should just be hand tightened. Part of the reason for that, or one is over tightening and messing up threads, but also there's a rubber gaskets in there, O-rings, and if you tighten it down too tight, it'll tend to crush them and damage them. So you just want to have it on there hand tight. And this particular tip is a 0. They go through ranges of numbers, and there's what happens with the pressures. That'll determine what kind of pressure you're going to use. That's the size of the hole, the orifice. And you should utilize, when you get to the point of setting the pressures, check the little charts. I think we have one taped to the wall, but check that before you don't just guess. When I was in school, they just sort of, I think with the standard was 5 and 5, which is pretty, 5 on oxygen, 5 on acetylene pressure for most of the welding things, and then 5 and 30 for the cutting, but you really should check the chart to make sure. Check the size of the tip you're working with. All right, so we got these two gases. You want to make sure they're chained and upright, and when they're in storage, they should have a separator between these two. The acetylene should be separated either by a wall. On our one at school, you notice there's a metal plate. This plate was a very special kind of setup that goes between them, but they should either do that, or I believe it's, in Connecticut it was like 20 feet apart. But anyway, these are under, the oxygen tank is under a lot of pressure. You wouldn't want to have this fall over and have the valve hit anything that would damage or break the valve off. You get a lot of pressure, it goes shooting across like a rocket. Torpedo, whatever you want to call it. Also, when you open up the oxygen, it is, from looking at above, it's lefty-loosey, and it's written on there. So that I turn to the left. I'm going to do that slowly, and it's best to put yourself, I got my safety glasses on, but it's best not to have, you don't want your face right there. This is fairly new. There's not a chance, but sometimes these things, because there's so much pressure, these things could burst. So you want to kind of be off the side or put yourself on the other side of the tank from it, and then slowly open this main valve. Now, before I did that, I did, because I came over, and I'm going to open up the oxygen valve the whole way. All right, before I opened that up, I had adjusted this, so this was completely loose, which is turning it all the way so it comes out, which is counterclockwise. So on this dial right here, I've got how much is in the tank. So the pressure, the oxygen's going there and it's stopped. Then to get pressure in the line, and before I do that, I should make sure these two main valves on the torch body are closed righty-tighty. I'm going to go clockwise with this, and this needle will go up. And just pretty much on this, it's sort of that first mark. Right there, which is hard to see in the video. All right, so that's on the oxygen under pressure. The acetylene, also we usually check with soapy water. We'll spray down some of the fittings and make sure. But one way to check that without using soapy water, if I now shut this all the way and look at that needle, I could wait a minute, and if it started dropping quite a bit, or if it had dropped in a minute or two, there's a leak somewhere in the system, so I should go and check the hose, or if there's ever anything wrong, shut things down and come and get me, or the lab tech. I would have to go through and check everything. I'm going to slowly, since I've just got a little bit of, there's already pressure in there. What happens if I, when this is empty, and I open up this, and if this was cranked all the way down, the reason I loosened it ahead of time is there's a little diaphragm in there, and the pressure would ka-chunk, you'll hear a loud kunk, and it won't break it the first time, but over again, it'll damage and change it. So these needles won't stay steady. They will move around on their own. It would be broken. Anyway, so that's the oxygen. The acetylene, I'm going to only open, I opened up the oxygen fully. I'm only going to open the acetylene. Now there's a little play in here, about a half a turn, quarter to half a turn. And then I have how much pressure is in the tank there. Now it's not under high pressure. The acetylene gas is dissolved in acetone, a liquid, and there's kind of a spongy material inside there. So that keeps it stable. Acetylene over 15 pounds per square inch is unstable. It says a red zone here on the pressure. So I'm usually not up into that high pressure with the acetylene. Anyway.
Another thing about the cylinders, specifically the acetylene cylinder, you should always have it upright. If it's laying down on its side, the dissolved in acetylene in acetone gets disrupted and doesn't work and can create a hazardous situation. So both cylinders should always be stored and transported upright.
Same thing, I had loosened this up ahead of time. We could use 5 or 3, so I'm going to turn this clockwise until I get to 5 on. There we go. On that. And these regulators have been pretty stable, but it's a good idea to take the torch over. Remember, as you open up the acetylene, there's flammable gas. So you can't smoke at school anyway, but you wouldn't be having any open flame or sparks around this. Never point the tip of the torch at anything, but I can point it away, and I can look at that needle, and I can open up the acetylene, and it drops a bit, so I'm going to adjust it. We're at about 3, so it hops a bit. So check it when I have it a little bit open. And if you could also check it when you're running to get the flame exactly what you want too, but it's a little bit more tricky. Same with the oxygen. I'm going to check that a little bit. Shut that. Now the oxygen, so the acetylene's flammable. The oxygen's not flammable in itself, but it creates a very highly oxidizing situation. So if you had oily you never get oil on any of these fittings, never getting grease or oil on any of the fittings, because it'll make those materials much more flammable. So it can increase the chance of it and the veracity of fire. So no oil or grease on any of these things. They look rusty, maybe we need new stuff. So we've got that set. At the end of when you're done working with welding or whatever you're doing, you're going to then, so you're done for the day, you're going to close. Oh, also, say if you happen to melt a hole or something happened, you're using kind of sparks come, and all of a sudden the end of this is on fire, this tip falls off, flames are shooting out of there, whatever. I mean, you can shut it right there quickly, but if something happens in here, what you should do, probably put this down, but shut both of these 2 valves quickly as possible. Part of the reason you only need it open quarter of a turn, this will shut off the fuel to the fire. So shut the acetylene and shut the oxygen very quickly at the main tanks, and call for help. But try to be careful of that getting spark. These hoses are designed to take a lot of abuse, but make sure they're out of the way. If you're using cutting, use a table, use a setup with a cutting thing so you're not over the top of the hose. All right, so back to shutting it down. When you're done, basically, You could shut them both at the same time if you needed to. So I've shut the valves, the main valves. Then, looking at the needles, I'm going to open up the oxygen and bleed the line so there's no pressure in there. And I'll shut that. Then I'll loosen this, the regulator adjusting screw. There's actually a screw in it. Same thing with the acetylene. I bleed the line. You may notice when you do that, you might smell, they put a smell in the acetylene. It's kind of a garlicky kind of smell. So if you smell something weird when you open up the tank, shut the tank and come in. Then I'm going to also loosen this. So now these are ready to go for the next person. And they're not, remember that's loosening them out. Don't crank them down tight because when you open this, it'll damage the regulator. These are the regulators, regular adjusting screws, main valve. Oxygen, green, usually orange. You can kind of see it on the torch here. The red, I know my hose is a little dirty. This is a red hose and a green hose, green for oxygen. Also, there's a little notch in the nut here attaching the hose to the acetylene part. Sometimes marked with F for fuel. But these are reverse, these are regular threads, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, and these are reverse threads, lefty-tighty, righty, I can't even say it. So you can't, so when people are assembling, it's harder to adjust to mess that connection up. You also have anti-reverse backflow kind of valves in there. Anyway, so I'm going to reset that up and we'll set the camera up differently and go and do a little bit of oxyacetylene welding.